Good morning and welcome to the continuation of Pittsburgh City Council budget hearings. I'm Council President Daniel Lavelle. I chair the Committee of Hearings and Policy. And for this hearing, we will be hearing from the Commission on Human Relations. Excuse me. As those from the Commission on Human Relations would like to join us at the table, as you all come forward, I will ask our Budget Director, Peter McDevitt, to do a brief overview of the department.
Thank you, Council President. The Commission on Human Relations is the official civil rights enforcement agency for the City of Pittsburgh, and it's empowered by Chapters 651 through 659 of Pittsburgh City Code to investigate instances of discrimination, conduct outreach, and provide education to the community, conduct research, and recommend additional protections in City Code to provide all people in Pittsburgh with equal opportunities. The Commission's mission is to decrease unfair treatment and discrimination by promoting justice and understanding among communities in the City of Pittsburgh. The Commission on Human Relations is divided into the following program areas: unlawful practices, administration and enforcement, intergroup police community relations, and education and outreach. And in the 2025 budget, there's proposed 8 full-time positions, which is the same as last year, with a 3% increase. Quick summary of non-personnel changes. There's no change to the non-budget personnel line, or non-personnel budget line. There is a change, though, a swap of $1,000 decrease in professional and technical services that is offset by a $1,000 increase in supplies. And in the capital budget, the Commission on Human Relations has a $94,500 deliverable for fair housing administration and training. And then just quickly, there's a couple of trust funds to note. There's the HUD Fair Housing Program Trust Fund, which is for any and all expenses related to the review or disposition of fair housing cases, training, outreach, and other related activities. And the EEOC Trust Fund, which is for any and all expenses related to the review and disposition of EEOC cases, training, outreach, or other related activities. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. If you would kindly introduce yourselves and if there's any remarks you would like to provide.
Yeah, of course. Good morning. Rachel Shepard. I'm the Executive Director for the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. And thank you for the overview. It does get a lot into what our mission actually is. I'm joined today with Megan Rose from Women's Center and Shelter, who wanted to appear on our behalf. So I hope that that's okay for everyone. And I also have some of my staff behind me because they are always behind me in all of the things that I've been working on. So I really appreciate them. And I appreciate you all for being here on Monday morning after a holiday weekend. So thank you for being here for that. I don't want to take up too much time. I know you all have a lot to get through, especially with the Controller's Office today. I did want to get a little bit of information to you on just some statistics about the Commission, things that we've accomplished this year, and some of the things that we are struggling with. So to begin, we received about 94 total new cases in the 2024 case year. So for our office, our case year begins on October 1st and ends September 30th. So we had a total of 94 new cases. Like I said, we've seen an uptick in our housing cases by at least 10 cases last year alone, which is interesting and shows that we're doing sufficient outreach in the area of housing, but it could definitely be more. I mean, to hear that there are 22 housing complaints in the city of Pittsburgh, we know that there are more. We know that there's more going on there. But to give an idea, so we have those 94 cases that we took on, 271 inquiries total last year. So we had almost 300 people. Actually, the inquiries are actually from this calendar year, so January through present, we have 271 inquiries. So those are people that reached out to our office looking for help with a discriminatory matter, something having to do with housing, employment, the police treatment, city services, or public accommodations. And of those, we were only able to take 94 cases. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't do something with those other cases. I like to highlight that we have an extensive resource list at the Commission. We want to make sure that people end up where they should end up, and we make sure that they get to somewhere else. We do warm handoffs to Housing and Urban Development, to the EEOC, to the State Commission on Human Relations. We want people to feel that they can trust us, even if there isn't something that we can directly do for them, but that we're not going to just send them to a dead end. So, and of those 271 inquiries, several of them were cases that we were able to take at the inquiry stage and the intake stage for EEOC. We have a work sharing agreement with both the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and Housing and Urban Development for those types of cases. And for the employment, we are permitted to do intakes only for those cases that fall outside of our geographical jurisdiction. So anything that's just outside the city borders, in Allegheny County, or even in a different state, we can take those intakes and send them over to the EEOC. This has been incredibly helpful this year because EEOC is operating, unfortunately, at a speed that is less than optimal. They have lost a number of staff. They have a 4-month waiting list for people to get an intake interview. And that can be the difference between someone having their case fall into jurisdiction time-wise or not. So we do our best to take those on as we can, even though we don't have a dedicated intake person. Our 4 investigators have taken on those intakes and have been incredibly efficient in getting people processed in a more timely manner. We're talking 1 or 2 weeks instead of 4 months. So the other highlights for this year, we were able to hire our deputy director and an investigator. We are fully staffed, which I am very proud to say. We also have an intern right now and an unpaid law clerk through the County Bar Association. So we have a number of people that are working with us to support our efforts, including our community partners. So thank you again to everyone who had us come out and do presentations for them this year. We did get enough commissioners this year to ensure that we could start up some of our committees again. We have our Community Relations Committee meetings monthly, and we've been talking pretty heavily about youth outreach, trying to get into the schools for students that are joining the workforce or will in a few years be joining the folks who are tenants in the city of Pittsburgh and looking for their first place to live on their own. In addition to that youth outreach, we look at the colleges in the city of Pittsburgh. So we have an ongoing presentation that we do with the University of Pittsburgh so that we can give the students information on what they can do to advocate for their rights, things to watch out for as they enter the world of housing in Oakland and beyond. Let's see. We were able to secure a new general solicitor this year. This is the first new solicitor we've had since 2016 when I joined the commission. Malo, Brungo, and Malo has been incredibly supportive. They came ready to hit the ground running and join us for all of these different public hearings that we have. That is another update from this year, is that we've seen an uptick in public hearings just in general. This means that we did an investigation, we found probable cause of discrimination, and we were unable to get the case resolved with a settlement. So if it goes beyond that, we take it to a public hearing where a panel of commissioners will hear the case fresh, and we will have an ability to produce findings of fact and an order on that. It is a lot of work to do public hearings. It is a pretty high cost to do public hearings. We currently have 6 on our docket, and the number has just been going up because folks have been increasingly unwilling to settle after a probable cause finding. They don't seem to take the commission's process very seriously, so we are working on improving that credibility through the community so that they believe that they can come to us and have some sort of real resolution. We are one of the few commissions in the country that has enforcement power. So if we have a public hearing where we find that there was discrimination and we want to order that there are penalties, or you have to pay back pay, or you have to repay fees, anything, even punitive damages, we can take that and enforce it in court. And I've seen it done before. We've taken it all the way to the point of a judgment where we had to almost collect some property from one of the respondents because they were so unwilling to meet the burden that was in their order. And it turns out they were willing to work out a payment plan after that. So it's it's not something that I take for granted, that the commission has this power, and I want to be able to enforce it as best as I can. And like with our new solicitor, I feel very comfortable in moving forward with these things. They have been very supportive. We're looking to amend our rules and regulations to get with the times. It's been, I believe the last time we modified them was just before COVID, literally the week before we shut down. So we have some things to update. Things have changed a little bit since then, and they'll be working with us on that. The last thing that I'd like to mention in a way of updates is that we're now investigating housing cases for federally funded housing providers. That is something that hasn't been done by the Commission in recent history. We work pretty heavily with the Fair Housing Partnership to figure out how to properly investigate these things, because there are layers to these federally funded housing providers and the regulations that they have to meet, both with the city code and beyond. So we do work with our partners, again, very heavily to ensure that we're touching everything that we should be, collecting all of the evidence and using all of the resources that we have at our disposal. Some of the highlights from this year, fair housing related, since we're on that topic, we have an annual event in April for Fair Housing Month. We had the event again this year at the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, where we spoke directly to those federally funded housing providers to address the issue of criminal history when they're taking on tenants. That's something that HUD was looking at this year. They have not put out a formal rule yet, but they had a proposed rule that was up for comment earlier this year. It was very timely with our event. We were lucky to have that publicity. But speaking to those housing providers about when you're evaluating somebody as a potential tenant and you are working with federal funds, what are the obligations there? And the onus for this with us is that we would like to eventually add criminal history as a protection under city code for Pittsburgh residents. We want to be able to ensure that people are treated as people, they are individuals, and that we are looking at them each in turn based on what their criminal action was, and how long ago it was, and ensuring that we are not calling them bad tenants simply because they have a criminal history. That is a disparate impact on people of color, as we know, and we try to make sure that we're getting ahead of things that might be potentially harmful, as there are enough harmful things already in place. In addition to the fair housing event that we have in April, we've been having regular fair housing trainings that are available to anyone, really, but we make them available for folks in our fair housing settlements. Any cases that come before us and we find cause, or if they're willing to mediate with us, then we 9 times out of 10 will mandate training. We want them to learn what the city code what they have to do under the city code. They need to know their responsibilities. And a lot of folks, when they take on being a housing provider, they don't quite know all of the ins and outs of that. So we do offer those free trainings. It's almost quarterly. And for anyone that would be interested, we're actually having one next week. It'll be December 11th from 4 to 7. And we're hoping to we have at least a few people that we already have signed up, but we do really open it up to anyone who might be interested in learning more about fair housing in Pittsburgh. From the employment perspective, we did have an employment CLE, so that was in July of this year. It did get kicked back quite a bit. That was based on a grant that we got from the EEOC. Unfortunately, they have pulled back on those grants, I found out, for 2025, so that'll be another hit to the funding sources that we see. But that CLE was geared towards employment attorneys who do discrimination cases. And I know that several folks from the city's law department appeared as well, which was great. But we want people to know what our process looks like, how we work with the EEOC, what our work sharing looks like, and how we divvy up the work. We want to make sure that people, when they come to us, are not confused by the process. We found that a number of complainant attorneys would come to us simply to fulfill their administrative burden, and that's honestly a detriment to their clients. They should be coming to us because we can process their intakes faster. We can get them into an investigation and potentially get it resolved in 6 months. We offer mediation throughout the entirety of our process. So there are a lot of options on the table there that they are giving up if they file the administrative charge and then ghost us, which is what they were doing. So again, the CLE, we had a full room. We're hoping to do these annually now so that we can really reach people. And we did offer CLE credit. It was free to anybody who attended. So again, anyone who might be interested in that will hopefully be having that again in 2025. The medical marijuana ordinance was passed earlier this year. I know everyone was very involved in that, and I appreciate everyone's perspectives on all of that, because it is something that we want to ensure that we're protecting people on these individual basis. They're using a medication legally, and they should be permitted to have the opportunities that other folks have, provided that we are ensuring safety and that making sure that people know their boundaries. So we do have some guidance out on that now. It is on our city website, and I believe I got some distributed to the city council offices, so if anybody's interested. And then last, I'll just mention our LGBTQIA plus research. This is housing research that we've been doing throughout 2024 with Out With Studio. They are a vendor that we're working with. They're very urban planning oriented, but they are working with us to collect surveys and information from the city residents or just outside the city who are in the LGBT community, and we want to know what their experience has been. We've had sexual orientation as a protection since 1990 and gender identity and expression since 2014, but we rarely see those protections in complaints. And we know that there are things happening. We know that Pittsburgh is just much better situated in general and more welcoming to that community in general, but we know that it's not happening. So we wanted to hear more. We do have a number of surveys that we've collected. We should have the data ready by the end of this year, hopefully. I do have a meeting with them today, but we want to be able to do more for this community. If they're experiencing things and they don't feel like they have anyone that they can trust or somewhere to go, we want to be a resource for them. We want to be able to come out and train people on what your rights are. If you know what your rights are and you know how you can advocate for yourself, it gives you more opportunities to secure the best possible situation for yourself. So we've been working with a number of different community groups who provide those kinds of supports to the LGBT community, give those referrals so that we can ensure that we're getting out there and letting them know, hey, we're here, we're a resource, we want to be supportive, and we want to build that trust. So please tell us how we can do that. Tell us what you're experiencing so we can address that. I mentioned that we're working on criminal history in housing as a protection, maybe a little less so as a full protection and more as just looking at the individualized assessment piece. We're also looking at the non-solicitation, which was brought up by Councilperson Gross last year. We've been having our law clerk work on those for us and do some research. We're looking at Philadelphia's ordinance on that one to see how we can avoid this predatory solicitation that's happening where homes are being bought out by LLCs in the city of Pittsburgh and folks are losing their housing. People who are disabled or elderly are being preyed upon to have their homes bought out from under them, and they need a quick fix. They need the money, and they'll take that. Those cash for houses can be really, really tempting if you're in a bind. In terms of what we're asking for in 2025, I've named a number of different outreach activities that we've done. This has been, primarily myself, but with the deputy director, our investigators, it's really all hands on deck in our office. We do pull everybody in to participate in tabling. We were at City in the Streets this year. We do Know Your Rights presentations for different entities. We did Jewish Family and Community Services this year, and some others. But we would really like to expand the outreach efforts of the commission. Our mission says that we're looking to eliminate discrimination in the city of Pittsburgh. We know that that's a lot. That's asking a lot. It's probably not all that attainable even in my lifetime, but we want to get ahead of it. So if we can provide training to other places, other community services, so that they can share it with their constituents, with their service populations, then we can try to get ahead of some problems. We try to reach out to landlords in a way that it's mutually beneficial to them. When we have these settlement agreements and we mandate training, it's just as much to help them so that they don't commit the same problems again, as it is for us to, give some kind of punitive measure for the fact that they've done something incorrect. So getting out there and doing this outreach is really important to us. There are 90 neighborhoods. We all know that they are very different in and of themselves. Even with your council districts, you know how different they can be just crossing a border, one street to another. So we want to be able to focus in on these on these different populations individually, make sure that we're addressing what needs they have. And to do that, I'm asking for the small increase in the budget for 2025, which is, I believe, $10,221, I believe was what it was at. It might be slightly more if there was an increase. But that is to promote our administrative assistant position. Our current administrative assistant has been in the role for 5 years. He is helping us with intakes. He does outreach events just like everybody else. But he does a lot of administrative functions that we have now been able to eliminate in certain ways because we have the digital options that we have now. So post-COVID, we're doing so much more electronically. We're using Adobe Sign. We're doing settlement agreements that way. So a lot less paperwork needs to come in and out of the office. Even in the 90s, the commission had several typists and clerks and things like that. And as we know, as they brought the computers in, we had less need for those folks. But we don't want to lose anybody. We want to use the resources that we have. And this staff member is incredibly knowledgeable and dedicated to the cause of the commission. So adding the $10,000 to promote this position to an outreach and intake coordinator, it gives us the ability to bring back that position that we lost a few years ago. So we lost it because we had to add a fourth investigator back onto the staff. We were seeing too high a number of investigations to justify having an outreach and intake coordinator at that time. We were rebuilding. This time last year we were down a few staff. We were fewer commissioners. We've been able to rebuild. So with this position, adding that small add to our budget can get us a position where this person will coordinate our intakes. That is less work that the investigators need to be doing. That's less work that the deputy needs to be doing so that they can focus on the more substantial things that they need to be focusing on. These investigators have, 25, 30 cases apiece. And that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but that is really what is manageable in the role that they're in. We work with our federal partners and hear that they have upwards of 100 cases apiece, and that is not sustainable. They are not completing their cases timely. Their questions are going unanswered for years, and that's just not something that I ever want to get into. So giving the investigators back their ability to properly investigate, thoroughly investigate, and quickly investigate will help with our process and reducing those case processing times. So the intake coordinator piece, that is essential, but obviously the outreach. We want someone else who is more dedicated to keeping on top of which community groups we've already been in touch with, who we can work with again, who needs a repeat training. Those are things that I was keeping on top of until we started having the number of public hearings that we've been having. It is a very extensive process. It is a very legal-based process, and it is something that I would like to be able to pay more thorough attention to rather than trying to rearrange my schedule because there are, tabling events in the evening that I would rather not have to send my staff to because it's a holiday week. Having an outreach person who knows that that's the gig, knows that that's what they have to go do, and being willing to do that will give us the ability to be in more places at once. The number of overlapping events in certain times of the year is immense, so I cannot be in more than one place at once, and oftentimes the staff have out of typical office hours types of interviews and things, site visits and things like that, so they can't be at everything either. So again, we're asking for this small increase. It would be a non-union to a union position, and we know that can be a struggle sometimes, but it is one of those things that we work pretty closely with the union to ensure that they know what we're doing, they know our intentions, and this is a position that was created a few years ago that we did have to roll back. So putting it back on the salary roster would be a good faith effort on our part to get that union position back into the budget. A need that we have that's not budgetary. We need commissioners. We are at a point where we have 10 commissioners working for us right now. We have 15 total on our board. So we have the 5 vacancies, and then 2 folks we have right now that are on borrowed time. Their terms expired last year. They are both people who have very busy lives. They are doing a lot of different things. They've been with us since 2017, and they would like to move on. But if we lose those two people, we've cut the commission in half. Half of our commission is the compliance review section. They see cases monthly, so we need them to be able to process cases and keep things moving so that we can close cases, we can give people the resolution that they need, keep things flowing. Back in 2023, we were down to 5 commissioners. That is what we need for quorum for a regular business. 3 are required for compliance review, and it was very difficult to keep things moving that way. I would really not like to see us get back to that point. So adding commissioners is essential. We've been suggesting different commissioners, sending resumes, having people apply, but I'm not sure if there's anything that City Council would be willing to do to try and keep that flowing and get folks into the interview process. We do try to be very transparent with people when we're talking about becoming a commissioner so that they know what that position actually entails. It is more than just a meeting a month. There is our monthly meeting, but then, like I said, there's compliance review. The other half of the commission does the public hearings, which we were able to dial back a bit in 2023 when we didn't have as many commissioners because we weren't seeing as many public hearings. Now that we have 6 on our docket, and it's only going up from there, we have to have a minimum of 3 commissioners on a panel at a time. If we only have, 3 or 4 commissioners on public hearing section, which is where we are right now, that really limits us. There are conflicts, and we have to make sure that we don't have those conflicts so that we can hear these cases. So ensuring that we have a full range of commissioners is really important to us, so I wanted to bring that to the table today just to make sure that everyone's aware and of our ask. We just want to make sure we can tell you exactly what it is that we need, even if it's not something that's budgetary. We know it's a small ask, we know it's a tight budget for 2025, but we wanted to make it known that we're trying to make it work with what we have. We're trying to just build on what already exists rather than adding new. Well, that's the worst thing that could have happened during the budget hearing. But thank you for your time today. I know I took a little bit longer than I anticipated taking, but I would really like to give Megan a chance to speak as she was kind enough to show up on our behalf today.
Sure. Good morning, Council. Thank you, Rachel. As Rachel said, my name's Megan Rose. I work at the Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. We have been serving survivors in the community for 50 years this year. I supervise a program called Standing Firm. Standing Firm is housed at the Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. You may recognize that name. The Standing Firm program was involved in the 2022 work to add domestic violence survivors as a protected class. Standing Firm has been in the community for 15 years, supporting survivors of domestic violence to reach and maintain financial stability, primarily by engaging employers to develop and strengthen a response to domestic violence in the workplace, though we certainly know about the challenges faced by survivors with respect to housing from our colleagues at Women's Center and Shelter. Early into my time at Standing Firm, Councilwoman Strasburger connected me to the Commission on Human Relations, and since then we've worked to develop a relationship, collaborating on a grant application to the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor in May, and Rachel presented at our Supporting Survivors Summit this past October. It may sound cliche, but I do believe a budget is a moral document and showcases the priorities of a city. I was disappointed, though not entirely surprised, to learn that the Commission on Human Relations is one of the lowest funded in the city. The requested increase, I believe, is a bargain for the changes proposed and the opportunity presented to conduct outreach, create efficiencies, and touch corners of the city so that more people, including survivors, can get their concerns addressed, be empowered, and obtain and maintain employment, ultimately financial independence from their abusers, which is my mission and mandate. We've been investing in a relationship with the Commission on Human Relations because we believe in this work and we want the city to join us in that investment. So I'm excited when I think about what would be possible through increased collaboration and capacity at the Commission. and I'm just here to express my support.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll turn it over to members if they have any questions or thoughts. I'll start with Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you both for being here, and thank you, Director Shepard, for just the remarkable work you've done. I know every year it's work that's done on on a tight budget and with fewer staff than you could use to fully accomplish your mission, and it's just remarkable what you're able to accomplish every year. So thank you, and it's incredibly important work. And it's only going to become more important, I foresee, in the future. So I guess my first question is the 10,000, the most critical sort of piece, the 10,000 additional in personnel to bump up your administrative assistant to a intake coordinator. Is that the name of it?
Outreach and intake coordinator.
Outreach,
yes.
and outreach is incredibly important too. Intake coordinator. Is that reflected in the version that we see now, or is that above and beyond? Was that included in the budget?
It was not included in the mayor's budget. That is something that that was the only ask that we had.
Got it. Okay.
That was what was presented.
Okay, because I was just curious because I saw a slight increase, but I'm guessing that's just cost of living.
That's the
Okay,
cost
so
of living. Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. So noted. Thank you. And I know that I always say let's keep it to the budget, but I'm just curious, like related to what you're working on right now and into the future. I mean, you cover so much. It's every protected class for housing, employment, and public accommodations. That's almost infinite. So if you had to choose, if you're triaging, and I know that you want to be everywhere and you could attend but if you had to triage, we really need to get the employers next year, every employer, and make sure they know that we exist so that we are arming the ones that want to do right by the law, with the information they need. Or we really need to get to the housing providers, or we really need to work with the HUD fund, the federally funded housing providers, or we really need to get to this pocket of a community that isn't usually engaged with us. Mm-hmm. Where are you thinking you need to spend your time in the coming year more than you have?
Yeah, with the employers, we've been already amping up the outreach to them because of the medical marijuana protections. We want them to be aware ahead of time so that they don't feel blindsided if they start receiving complaints. We're providing the information equally across, but we want to make sure. So I have my intern currently reaching out to some of the largest employers in the city so that we can try to get to the right person to provide the information that we need to. I think that's the biggest part of the battle, is trying to find the right person within an organization, because oftentimes you would assume that it would go to HR, and they are not the ones that get to make decisions. They're not the ones that write the policies. They just enforce them. So we're navigating our way through that. That is the manpower required there. But we've been attending career fairs where we've been connecting with different employers so that we can ensure that they know what their mandate is under the city code. And as you mentioned, it will be particularly important as we move forward in the next year. I wanted to point out that our laws will remain intact and enforceable here in the city of Pittsburgh, even if things are rolled back on the federal level. So if something should happen to the EEOC, I know they're under fire right now, if something should happen to them, we would lose our financial support, our work sharing agreement, but we would continue to take those cases. So that is something that we can continue to do. But if we're looking at getting out there, we've been trying to address the outreach in a way that is something that already exists. So the career fairs where people are coming together to share their vacancies, we can talk to both employees and employers there. That's like a double whammy. With the housing, we have, one of the other things I didn't mention is that we have a contract that's about to be signed with Just Mediation Pittsburgh. So if you're unfamiliar, they're the eviction mediation program here in the city of Pittsburgh. They're seeing upwards of 200 mediations a month. So we negotiated with them that if we provided some financial support to them to provide the stipends to their mediators and their administrative staff, that they would then distribute information on behalf of the commission to each of the tenants that they work with and the housing providers. So again, we're trying to reach them all simultaneously in the least amount of effort possible. So we were lucky enough to have the financial stability at that point to offer this contract to them, and it is a one-year contract with an option to renew for one. So because we have not yet started to distribute those materials, I don't know what the impact of that will be, but I imagine that a number of these cases will then go to mediation and require some level of support from the commission, because we are looking at a discriminatory issue and they might be looking for some way to navigate through that. But also it will give the tenants who have likely also experienced something discriminatory in their housing an option to contact someone else when they are in a better and more stable space. So that's pretty much how we've been addressing all of these things. We're also working with the Office of Nighttime Economy to get things out about the public accommodations issues. We know that in spaces like Southside, not to call out Councilperson Charlin's district, but Southside has a ton of businesses, a lot of nightlife, and there are discriminatory things happening there, and people don't realize that what they're doing is discriminatory. They haven't had the proper training. They're being led by like the liquor control board, right? Like they're looking at those kinds of policies, those kinds of rules, and they don't realize that there are things in city code that they are also beholden to. So again, working with the folks that already are in these spaces and doing distribution of materials and having those relationships with people is the best way for us to get out there as we are.
Thank you. I did see in the Office of Nighttime Economy's newsletter a first article on that, knowing what your responsibility is. It was great. So good to know that was that originated with CHR. I guess do you see a need to work with more city employees to refresh city employees as to, their rights and responsibilities, especially those who are more public facing? I can only imagine that, all the different types and ways that we interact with the public, and to remind people not only of their own responsibilities, but of their responsibility to educate those that they work with. Do you think that that is a need in the way that we have, mandatory trainings in other ways? Could that be maybe not a mandatory, but a way to engage employees? Or do you already do that?
No, this is something I've been asking for time and time again. I'm not the first director that's asked for it, but to be able to address the city departments, their management directly, so that they can know what their responsibility is. We have with the turnover with different administrations and things, we want to make sure that people know what the regulations are beyond just the city policies, right? Because it goes beyond that. So that is something that I've wanted to do for some time now. I have been able to have some success with certain departments. I did just do a Know Your Rights training for 311, mostly so that their staff would know better how to direct folks when they are getting contacted, because anything that was coming up with the word housing in it was getting sent to the commission, and not everything that has to do with housing is a discriminatory issue, and we want to cut down on the number of times we have to transfer people. So, but that is absolutely something that I would love to do if folks would be willing. I like to highlight that we are not out to get the city. We want to support the city in every way that we possibly can. I know that it's been a tight relationship with them for a long time, where we can take cases against the city. We have the ability to do that as an independent agency, but that is not our goal. Our goal is to get ahead of it, to give the education that's necessary so that we can get around these problems and see fewer city cases. But the fact is that the city employees are City of Pittsburgh citizens. They deserve to know what their rights are. So being able to do training for departments and touch all the staff is just as important to me. I want everyone to know what they have available to them, especially in the times that we're in, where things are a bit tumultuous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll end it here by saying if we can stay in touch about setting at least one up for city council and staff. Again, we have, the nature of city council is that we have staff, joining at all times, and so sort of even like having twice a year, semi-annual kind of briefings to educate remind council members and educate staff is really helpful, in part because of the number of, we're intake people too, right? The number of people that we talk to and the number of times that we're out in communities and need to remember to highlight the work and highlight your existence, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the challenge, I understand, is people even remembering that there is a city CHR. I guess I'll just end by thanking you again we'll obviously all discuss the budgetary request, but thanking you again for the work that you do every day. And I'll speak for myself, not all of council, that if you ever need resources in terms of getting in front of new communities or community organizations or kind of finding the most efficient way to do that, we'll certainly we'll offer my support there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I did appreciate the opportunity to come and do a briefing for City Council and their staff earlier this year. It is something that I'd like to do on a more regular basis for the reason that you mentioned. With the turnover, you want to make sure that everybody who's on that front line and taking those calls and those emails can send them to the right place. And, I can tell you in an hour what we do at the commission, enough that you can relay that to someone else and then share the knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other members? Councilwoman Kell Smith?
Thank you. And I didn't realize you had such a small budget considering what needs to be done, but a few things I'd like to say. I would be supportive of that, but I do want to say I think it's unusual to have somebody come to the table, for your comment. I appreciate your comments and I appreciate the work you do. I actually do a lot with domestic violence, but I thought it was unusual for somebody to come to the table instead of public comment, to speak about the budget and advocate for the budget. That's usually a public comment piece unless you work for the commission. But you're not working for the commission, correct? No. Okay, I just want to make sure I have it right. And then I would just say that I think that some of the concerns I have is, I think with the city, we're doing a lot of outreach, but I think those QR codes and other things are ways that we can reach more people. And I would like to see us do more in that in terms of reaching the immigrant population with using QR codes. I do want to say that we had this past month when we talked a little bit about, or I put in a legislation, and you sent a news release to say that we were in jeopardy of violating the fair housing laws. And I want to know why you thought that. Because, it's important because you have partial responsibility for this. And yet we were told by the person who actually does enforce the fair housing laws in the city of Pittsburgh that we were not even near out of violence. If anything, we've reinforced them because of the domestic violence piece that we added in and some other things. So if anything, this city council strengthened it. So if that's your responsibility, I'm kind of concerned why you thought, and I'm curious why you thought. So I'd like to hear.
Absolutely. So we do work with the Fair Housing Partnership really heavily. Megan Hammond is the authority on fair housing here in Pittsburgh. I will never deny that. Right. Because I do have to divert my attention between employment, public accommodations, the city services, all of that. So we do rely very heavily on them. The response that we had was not that this would be a direct violation of fair housing laws, but that the implication that the changes to be made in the zoning laws were necessitated by fair housing is false. It just is. And the fact is that if we're talking about our community in a way that is continuing the stigma, I do agree that the community should have input in what goes into their community. I don't think that there should be just free reign in the housing market, but we need to acknowledge that if there is free reign in the housing market, that will allow for developers to further gentrify our spaces. They will snatch up the cheapest of the properties in the neighborhoods that are struggling, and they will flip them and push people out even further. And that does have a disparate impact, and we know that has a disparate impact on single mothers with children where there's not enough family-sized housing, when there are people of color who are in these neighborhoods that if you put a redlining map over top of the neighborhood maps that we have right now, it looks the same as it did in the 50s. So that is the highlight that we want to make. Certainly we don't mean to throw anyone under the bus with these things. We want to highlight that everybody should be treated like a community member, whether they have a house or not, whether they are unhoused, whether they need temporary housing, whether they are in a recovery home, or if they are in a disabled household where they need to be with other people.
I'm going to say to that, first of all, I'm not the one who said we were in jeopardy of the fair housing laws in violation. That was said by the Planning Commission. So maybe your news release should have been directed towards them, not to me. And then the second thing is that even though we have a lot of concern about housing, and I share a lot of your concerns. Some of the implications and the unintended consequences of that legislation that mine was blocking would be that it would open up Pandora's box, and it would remove all the barriers for that's preventing the corporations from coming into Pittsburgh and buying up our property. So the people who would be affected are the minority community, are the communities like Homewood, Knoxville, Sheridan, areas where they are predominantly low income or have a high number of minorities in those communities. So when I really thought I thought you were pretty much playing politics instead of doing your job when you did that, because I thought if you really wanted to make a change or have a different, you would have contacted me directly, which I didn't hear from you at all. But I did hear, and I was in contact with Megan, who is the expert, and then the Planning Commission did change their mind about what they had said initially. So for that to be said, I just want to make sure that's clear, because I didn't appreciate that coming out, and I felt like it was political more than it was productive. And I think I'm open to any conversation about how we can make this productive. And when I continue to hear people are fighting me, my legislation calls for public process and for city council, the people that are elected, to have a vote. Not one person who's appointed by somebody who's appointed by the mayor. And that's one political person having control over all the land and all the stuff that's happening. I want to make sure that the people's voice are heard. And I would think that would be something you would be advocating for, is for the people to have their voice heard. And so I'm happy to advocate for new positions, but I want to make sure that you're going to do what's actually right and not what's politically expedient for you at the time. Thank you.
I'd be curious to know what my press release did to affect anything
Nothing.
having to do with the zoning. Right,
Yeah,
it did
it
not.
did nothing.
It did not, but it did express the opinion that we should not be fear-mongering, and that sometimes the best of intentions
I have
come
the floor.
across.
Sometimes the truth can be fearful. It can be scary. Sometimes the truth can be reality. Read the legislation and then tell me what you think. That's the end.
Thank you. Any other member? Councilman Warwick.
Yeah, so thank you, Director. I appreciate you coming here and your thorough explanation. Also, thank you so much for all the work with the medical marijuana protections. You are integral to helping us get that bill to a place that it works, and to helping us get it passed. So I appreciate that. I did want to ask a little bit about, so when you were talking about investigating housing cases for HUD-funded providers, so I guess I'm curious about, so would that be, so just if you have, so for example, would that be like continually broken elevators that then affect, folks in wheelchairs, or would that be general things like just general, unhealthy or unsanitary conditions in a home?
So if we're talking about habitability, that's less to do with our office. That's part of what we just discussed with 311, is that a lot of times the habitability issues with, infestations of rodents or insects, or the mold issues, or things that are more maintenance driven, it is less to do with us in a lot of ways. It can be considered a discriminatory issue if it is affecting a person in a protected class or a group of people in a protected class. So if we know that it is a low income building, and that it is primarily people of color, single mothers with children, people that we protect with our laws, that we can look into that. So we did have a case recently that was to do with an elevator. And it wasn't a federally funded property, but it was a property where there was an elevator required to have folks travel for their housing. And when it was down for an extended period of time, that was considered to be a violation, because they were fighting for an alternative. They needed something to step in place of the elevator, or for them to fix it more rapidly, because there are folks with asthma or other conditions that they could not climb 7 flights of stairs to get to their housing. So I would say if there's ever any question about whether something discriminatory is going on, that can be fielded to our office. The majority of the cases that we take on are on an individualized basis, so it is like one tenant with a housing provider, potentially a landlord, a property manager. But with the housing that's HUD funded now, the reason I bring it up is because it has a different level of complexity. There are other regulations for the federally funded housing, the way that they report and they conduct themselves with their budgeting and how they operate, that we have to consider with our investigations that are just the private landlords are not beholden to.
Okay. Great, thanks. I guess maybe I'd like to know more about that as it develops, just because, we have issues that I think might fit in that if it ends up being something that we pursue. In my district, I mean. The other question, so for the commissioners, so you said that you're worried about not having enough commissioners. What's the process for nominating new commissioners?
So I can only make suggestions of folks or get the information out about what it is that we're looking for, different areas of interest that would be supportive to the commission's mission. Like I said, we have 10 commissioners currently, but we will be losing our reverend soon. We will be losing Wazi Muhammad, formerly of the Islamic Center. Mm-hmm. So we're looking for people to fill those spaces with the community so that they have representation on the commission. And we have 5 other vacancies that we need to fill. We're built this way so that we have enough people available in case there is a conflict of interest so that we can continue with business.
So, I mean, do people apply to join the commission, or?
There is an application process through the boards, authorities, and commissions website. The mayor is the person who actually appoints the folks, and then they come to you all for interview and confirmation, and then they would get sent to me for training, orientation, and to actually become a part of the commission.
Got it. Okay, thank you. With regard, I didn't read that press release. I'm not familiar with it until here at the table. But don't
make me comment, Barb.
Well, I mean, I do agree about we had a presentation here before a public hearing where it was said maybe 6 times, not by a council member, but by an employee of council, that imagine the public school in your neighborhood became a homeless shelter. And that was said many times, even though there are no plans to make any public schools a homeless shelter. It was just an unnecessary, stoking fear unnecessarily over something that I agree, we
are doing it.
Well, at any rate.
I'm just saying, you're saying not to stoke fear, but they are doing it. You're not doing it, but you are.
At any rate,
I'm sorry.
I just since we're at the table and talking about it, I do agree with you that we can address this issue of the zoning in a way that does not demonize our homeless population, and I wish that we were doing that too. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other member first round? If Councilman Mosley?
Thank you for coming today, Director. Shepard, I just had just a short round of questions, particularly around a situation that I know has affected District 8, District 6 in my district, when there's just kind of a follow-up to Councilwoman Warwick's line of questioning around, what is the threshold around determining whether it's a potential maintenance issue, with a property and a landlord, and a discrimination issue. We have a property owner that owns numerous multifamily and scattered site properties who haven't paid vendors, and there's been situations where tenants have had to get their water cut off because of the HUD property owner who is supposed to be paying the water bill isn't paying. Is that something that would fall into the discriminatory lane, or would that be something that would fall like in the maintenance section?
Yeah, so anything that's happening large scale and is impacting people within a particular protected class, that is something that we would call disparate impact. It's something that seems neutral but is having a disproportionate effect on a particular group of people. So based on what we're saying, we would have to evaluate that to see how many properties are there, what are the demographics of those properties. We have to establish standing. So we use prima facie elements of law to determine if a case, when it's brought to us, if a situation when it's brought to us meets the bare minimum for what would, if there was no legitimate non-discriminatory business reason for why these things are happening, that would prevail in court. So that's what we're looking at. It really is on a case-by-case basis. I would like to point out that the majority of the cases that we're getting that are based on federally funded housing are being sent to us by HUD right now, which is what is particularly out of the ordinary, because typically they would save those for themselves. But I believe they're in a position right now where they are struggling to keep up with the number of investigations, particularly in the Pittsburgh area, and they are sending some stuff our way. So it's just a different level of expertise and, coordinating with HUD to make sure that everything is happening appropriately. But yeah, I would say that anything that's happening, please send it our way so we can do an evaluation of it. If there's something we can do, we would certainly like to help.
Mm-hmm. And based on your expertise, do you think there's a particular reason why there is an uptick, in cases and complaints that, HUD feels so overwhelmed that they're passing on, cases to the Human Relations Commission as well?
Well, particularly with Section 8 situations, I know the Housing Authority has not been in the best of shape as of late. I try not to speak on such things because it is a part of the city of Pittsburgh. I don't want to make a generalization, but it is one of those things that we know that the source of income legislation was struck down here in Pittsburgh. We didn't have the authority for that. And Section 8 is a big part of that, right? That's the majority of it. But we don't have the ability to investigate cases on that basis. What we can do is look at the cases that are disproportionately affecting people in a protected class, which is the majority of Section 8 voucher holders. And what we would eventually like to do is partner with the Housing Authority to get out there and have more of a conversation about how we can work together to kind of destigmatize the Section 8 voucher process, encourage landlords to take those folks on. And eventually we'd like to just work more closely with the Housing Authority once their process is, what's the word I want to use? A little bit more, not streamlined, but just consistent. I know that a larger number of landlords are struggling with getting payments from the Housing Authority for any number of reasons, staff turnover, higher number of cases, I'm not sure what. But there are struggles there because of what's happening with the Housing Authority, and I think a lot of the struggles are now turning into discriminatory complaints because people are feeling the effects and they're in a protected group.
Mm-hmm. And just, if you could, provide, some context, could you give an example of what in the Section 8 program in particular, would rise to a discriminatory practice, within the context of that program?
If I'm thinking about it, so it could be a refusal to rent, and it could be something having to do with the fact that someone has a voucher, but they are being turned away, not because they have a voucher, but because of some other protection that they fall under. If they're a person who is disabled and they have a voucher and they're being refused rental because, oh, well, not only do you have a voucher, but you are also disabled and I might have to, change something about my property. That's something. If we're talking about like the federally funded, like actual housing properties, those properties that are set up that way, it really could be anything because there's a lot of overlap between typical landlord-tenant issues and discriminatory issues. So a lot of it could be the maintenance. It could be maintenance because someone is disabled and they are prioritizing, maybe they're prioritizing them over people who aren't. It really could be anything. I'm struggling to even find direct examples right now because it's just so fluid in how it happens.
Now, thank you for your time. I look forward to following you up about one property owner
Thank you.
in particular, and thank you for your work. And
Thank you. Councilman Charlin?
Thank you for being here and braving the elements to be in our chamber here. I just very quick question. So you handle discrimination cases from protected classes, right?
Yes.
Are there any classes that you wish that you, or any groups of people that are not protected classes that you wish that you could work in? And I understand that there's a lot of challenges for us to create those protected classes, but is there any where else that you'd like to explore?
Yeah, so the source of income, we already talked about how it's just not possible. It is a huge issue where landlords will refuse to take folks with a voucher, and that does have a really disproportionate effect on people. So we do look at that in terms of disparate impact in those cases, so we can take some things, but it is difficult. Again, I'd rather work with the Housing Authority to try and destigmatize and demystify the process for landlords so that they feel more comfortable. We also mentioned I think it might have been before you joined us, but the addition of criminal history in housing as well,
Right.
where we're looking at individualized assessment of each person's background instead of just one fell swoop policies of if you've had an arrest in the last 100 years, you are not a good tenant, because that's not real life. So the criminal history, we are looking at the non-solicitation. In terms of a protected class, probably housing status is the one that we're focusing on most heavily right now. That can include, we're looking primarily at the homeless, but also folks that are, temporarily housed in shelters, who are couch surfing, who are coming from a medical facility directly, maybe coming from a recovery home, and that are being turned away from housing on the basis that they are either have been unhoused at some point in their history, they are coming from some kind of facility, and they just don't want the drama, they just assume that they're going to be a terrible tenant instead of looking at the individual and seeing like what the reality would be.
I mean, is there any way that we could help you expand your reach into those areas, or do you need federal law to change?
No, so we have the ability, because of home rule, to add our own protections here in the city of Pittsburgh. That's why we have survivors of domestic violence. That's why we have preferred language and citizenship and immigration status, and et cetera. So we have so many different things that we can add. We've been exploring, because Washington, D.C. has the homelessness protection in their code. It is quite extensive. It took them 10 years to get it done. We're hoping that it takes us a little less time than that. We're currently working with different homeless service providers to collect information, to get some data on what really is happening out there. If folks are truly being turned away because they have a gap in their housing history, we know that it's happening on an informal level, but we want to get the data to back it up. So we're looking at those things right now, because we know that landlords are asking for an extensive tenancy history to take someone on as a new tenant. And what are people really looking at that and saying, oh, well, if you've been unhoused at any point in your history, you're not going to be a good tenant for me, and I don't want to take that risk. So we're just collecting information right now. So if any of the council members hear anything through their constituents that they're experiencing things like that, then we would like to know about it. Again, this is not a be-all, end-all solution for the homelessness crisis that is everywhere in this country, but it is one small piece that we can offer at the commission, that if people are being denied housing because they have had a period of being unhoused or being in a medical facility, that they can come to us.
One of the challenges I think that we have as council members, we all want to think that we're intimately involved with every resident in our district, and we do our best with that. But I do worry that we are not, someone who has the knowledge to call their city council member, that knows that we have a city council, that knows that this Pittsburgh address is actually in the city limits and not, in Forest Hills with a Pittsburgh mailing address, that person is often not the demographic that we're worried about and need to help out here. So are there things that we're able to, and I agree with Councilperson Strasburger, and that's why I want to have the briefings fairly regularly with your office to educate staff if something like that does happen. But more often than not, we're hearing those kind of cases second or third hand. We're not, someone isn't calling us saying, I was discriminated, and I know I'm going to get my city council involved here. What kind of proactive ways can we target that? This is a world that I don't have a level of expertise in at all, and I'm curious if like other cities have found a way to do that well.
That's a good question. I might have to look into that a bit more with the ways that council can more directly support it. At this time, we're looking to the service providers who are out there doing that direct service for the community members who need housing, making those connections for them, or even placing them in housing so that they can give us the information. Yeah, we certainly don't expect, the individuals who likely don't even know what number to call to reach you to be contacting us. That's part of the need for the outreach here, is that if people think that something like that is going on, that they would know, oh, there's an office I can call to at least evaluate what's happening there. But yeah, in terms of what council can do, if you're aware of any community groups that are active in your district that are assisting with the folks that are homeless or people who are moving from recovery homes into more permanent housing, or from even a medical facility. So we've had folks from Western Psych being discriminated against because they're coming from Western Psych. They were, in there for some period of time, and then they're trying to find housing afterwards, and they're being told, no, I'm not taking you. You just came from there. Like, I don't want to deal with that.
Sure.
So yeah, if there are agencies or other community groups that we should be aware of, and anyone who's working with the folks on the ground who we can get in better touch with, that would be the best way to support us, I think.
Great. Really, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you and your office do. When we think of making Pittsburgh a most livable city, this is the kind of stuff we need to see here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Second round, Councilwoman Strasburger and I believe Councilwoman Smith.
Thank you. No, I'll keep it real brief. Just based on that last line of questioning, it reminded me that I wanted to ask this in the first round. Have you been approached at all by the folks who were by city planning and the subcontractors for the comprehensive plan? No. Okay, it sounds like no.
To my knowledge.
Just along the lines of what Councilperson Charlin was saying, that is an effort to engage 10% of the city, particularly those that don't usually interact with the city. So just throwing that out there in case there's an opportunity to send a commissioner or yourself or your staff person to those community meetings and engage the community members who aren't normally frequent flyers with the city. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman Smith.
Thank you. I feel like I have to address this. I continue to hear people say that the letter Sean had put together for us was like fear-mongering, and I just want to make sure I say this. It was what was in the legislation, and so it's not that anybody's trying to do anything that's detrimental to anyone. Matter of fact, I tell people all the time, people in my office work every day to help people in the community. Like Kim in my office goes into encampments to help people. It's not something that we just take lightly, but I do believe firmly that the public has a right to know what's happening and to make sure that they also are making sure that hours of operations are okay with the community or not interfering in their quality of life either. I feel that they also have a voice and they also have a right to be heard. And I also feel like council was elected to represent them, not as zoning administrators. So I feel like anything other than giving people that opportunity is denying them their rights. And I feel like anybody who advocates for that otherwise is advocating to silence people and to diminish their, every other people's rights. So I'm not willing to to sacrifice one group over another. I want us to try to come up with some solutions together. And so I just want to make sure that's very clear. And when the legislation or the letter that went out said certain things, those were things in the letter. If I really wanted to do fear mongering, I would tell them exactly what that legislation could have done. A lot more in depth, and I did not. So I think that, having people say that, if they continue to say it, I'm going to have to really go there. So I'll just say from this point on, I hope that we can all work together. That's it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'd like to say that I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't think that the community should be shut out of the process. I think that there need to be checks and balances. There need to be a way for our community members to speak to the things that are happening in their community. That's the only way they have any control. And I don't mean personal offense with that press release. I do apologize if that's had a stronger impact than what I intended. But we're looking to try to, at the commission, we're trying to, remove any kind of stigma that might be there for these folks, and they're experiencing a lot. And as well, like you said, you have your staff going out to encampments, and that's something that a lot of people will just never understand, is going out there and trying to be on the ground and helping folks, and doing what you can for them. We want to advocate for a more livable Pittsburgh, right? We want people to be able to use the spaces that exist in a meaningful way that's going to be supportive. I do feel like a lot of the community members have this fear that's unfounded in a lot of ways, and I think that's really more of where I was coming from. So I don't mean to I'm not trying to argue. I do want to work with you.
Appreciate that, but I do want to say I think part of that comes from, first we said there was no issue with the homeless in the city, that we're doing such a great job, that downtown has no encampments anymore. Then we're saying that we have to change zoning because we have to take care of the homeless population. And but you're saying one thing one day, something different the next day. Then we said that we're fear mongering and there's no reason to be afraid. But then they took down encampments because of all the illegal activity and because they're afraid of what was happening to the people on the streets. So you can't say one thing one day and something different the next day and then think the public's going to just feel however we want them to feel. They see what's happening. They know what we're saying. They see what's going on in the city of Pittsburgh. And I think that there's ways to make sure that people are more comfortable with some of the decisions being made. And I think that all starts with conversations. And
Absolutely.
So that's why I would really appreciate any time. If you see something or think there's something that I need to be aware of and it's something I'm putting forward, I would welcome the opportunity to have a conversation. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I was down there for when you had called the public to come and make comment, and I saw the number of people that showed up. People feel very passionately about these things, and I do appreciate you for that, because that did put it just put a pause on the process, right? It gave us the space to have that community engagement that we need to have. I think,
unfortunately, I think there's something on the zoning commission on the 10th, something very similar. So we'll address that.
Yeah, there's also a lot of things going on in the zoning right now that are overlapping in some ways and I think they're getting misconstrued.
I think that if we have a conversation with the public a little bit better, and actually hear what people are saying, there's ways to come up with solutions. I always believe that people in Pittsburgh are genuinely good-hearted and want to help people. And I mean, we see that every time there's something that happens across the city of Pittsburgh, the outpouring of donations, the outpouring of gifts, things that happen when people come together. We see that often. But it starts with a conversation, not telling you what we're going to do in your neighborhood, whether you like it or not. We represent them, and it's time for us to realize it's not about our agenda. We're here to represent their agendas. So,
no, again, I'm not on either side.
Thank you.
I'm not supporting of the zoning as it is written. I have not made formal comment on that specifically. More just about the impact to the community. And again, it's meant on like a one. We're looking to not have that one fell swoop policy of like just reject everything because we're afraid, and more of having that conversation. So I do appreciate you bringing it to the.
And just as so you know. One of the things that I really took exception with is I actually did give suggestions of where we could do some things in our district, and nothing was ever done. So I just want to make sure that people know that this is not just one-sided thing. I understand. I think my community understands. I know they do. I trust them to make the right decisions for what's best for them. So I don't want to belabor this because I know I can go on forever about this subject, but I just want to make sure that if there's ever anything in the future that we're having a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from members? if not, just for myself, one, I'd be interested in following up with you regarding the criminal background, and sort of the legal threshold to actually be able to get that done, given some of the challenges we as a city face. I'd also be interested in following up with you regarding appraisal discrimination, which is, I think, an issue that certainly affects the African American community historically, but also given where our budget stands, it's also a downfall for our city budget because we're not bringing in as much taxes as we could because of discriminatory practices within appraisals.
Right.
So I'd like to follow up with you to have a conversation about what we could potentially be doing around that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that back up because it is something that I've been talking a bit offline with Megan Hammond because she's done a lot more work in the space of appraisals. We're looking into ways that we can potentially do testing on that, but it is very, very complex.
It is.
But we, again, are taking the route of trying to get ahead of it by offering training to those who are doing the appraisal so that they can be more mindful of their unconscious bias that when they're walking into that space, the assumptions that they're making based on prior experience, because we all have these shortcuts in our brain, but we shouldn't be basing, the figures on that. So yeah, we're looking at different ways to do that. But yes, I'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah, I've spoken with Megan about it as well. It's very complicated.
Yes, it
to
is.
try to appropriately set up and screen for it. But we can take that offline. Maybe the three of us can all sit down and talk about it.
Thank you.
If with that, I'll entertain a motion to recess, and then we'll move immediately into the controller's budget hearing.
Motion to recess.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are in recess.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Pittsburgh City Council budget hearings. I'm Councilwoman Erica Strasberg, and I chair the Committee on Hearings and Policy. And for this hearing, we'll hear from the City Controller's Office. So thank you for joining us today. And we are joined by Council Members Warwick, Cale Smith, and Mosley. And I'll turn it over to Director McDevitt to give a brief overview.
Thank you, Councilperson. The City Controller is the fiscal watchdog for the citizens of the City of Pittsburgh. It is the job of the Controller to protect city tax dollars from waste, fraud, and abuse. The Controller does this by auditing all city government-related expenditures. The city also has a finance department and treasurer who collect and audit all city revenues. The Controller also conducts audits of all city departments and city authorities such as the Urban Redevelopment Authority, Pittsburgh Parking Authority, Pittsburgh Water, and the Pittsburgh Housing Authority. Through audits of city departments and authorities, the Controller makes recommendations on how to make those departments more effective, efficient, and how to better spend city tax dollars. The Office of the City Controller includes the following core services: accounting, accounts payable, performance audit, fiscal audit, and engineering. In the 2025 general fund, there is a total of 57 full-time positions, which is a decrease of 1 position, and there are a number of actual position swaps in that, which are outlined for you. And overall, that is an increase of $422,953, or about 11.4%. And there are no changes to non-personnel budget items, and there is nothing in the capital budget. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Controller Heisler and your office for any remarks or presentation that you might have.
Thank you, Councilperson Strasburger.
I know that we have some audio interference. I know that we have our Cable Bureau working on that.
Okay,
Please proceed.
maybe that, there we go. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. Happy belated Thanksgiving. I hope everybody had a nice and safe holiday. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Deputy Controller Douglas Anderson, the Controller's Office Solicitor Namita Drackwarth, and our Director of Special Projects, Andrew DeWitt. So I'll just briefly touch on our 3 core functions. That we are the city's accounting function. We manage the city's books. Our accounts payable section, we pay the city's bills. And then our audits and reports, which is generally what you read about when you read about the Controller's Office in the newspaper. I'm going to touch on some things that are usually not discussed. In 2023, as of last week, Our office had executed more than 530 contracts, 387 brand new contracts, and 200 supplementals. In 2024, our office has issued 18,326 checks as of November 26th. We've processed $996.97 million and more than 84,000 transactions generally. That was 2023. In 2024, we're up to 969 million and more than 90,000 transactions. We are the city's watchdog. I'm very proud of the work that our office has been doing. As everyone knows, I'm in my first term and in my first year. We've really tried to streamline and reorganize our org chart, which you'll see reflected in the budget. And our audits, as I mentioned last year when I sat with Controller Lamb at the table, we're really trying to be responsive to what council is considering and what is before council or what's going on in the public, and trying to produce reports and audits that are timely and topical, and really working to narrow the scope so that we're directly answering the questions that council has before legislation or policy changes are considered. I will go through just some of the audits that we've done this year, special reports, but performance audits, we did the Parking Authority, the URA Housing Opportunity Fund, and right now we scheduled an exit conference for the Office of Film and Event Management, the Special Events Office. We did the Office of Management and Budgets, the American Rescue Plan Trust Fund, City Parks, DPW, the Phipps Conservatory Trust Fund, and the tax abatement and TIF programs are ready for release. So hopefully you'll see that in your inbox in the next 2 weeks. We have continued to expand our special reports function. We did a DPW contract review with the Garland Company, a P-card investigation, city contract and waiver procedures, which was at the request of City Council. We did a cursory report on the city water fountain issue over the summer, and we are continuing to expand our footprint with Pittsburgh Public Schools. As you all know, we serve as the controller for Pittsburgh Public Schools as well. So that is what our office does. I'd love to have a conversation and hear what questions you have about our office, what questions you have about the work that we're doing. As I said, I want our office to be a partner in city government. So anything that we can do that helps you do your job or to the administration, we want to. We want to be a resource. And often when you hear audit, it usually doesn't evoke warm and fuzzy thoughts, but it is actually, we find good things in every report too. So that's what I hope we're doing and the service we're providing. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chair Strasburger for further conversation.
Thank you very much. I think we'll just go down the line, and anyone who has questions, please. Councilmember Warwick.
Sure, thank you. Thanks all for being here. I guess, and thank you for all the work that you do for the city. Oh.
Now the question is, did anyone online hear any of that? Hopefully they did. Okay. Please proceed.
We'll tell the public because it's on camera. He's fixing the mic.
Okay.
We were just switching on a microphone thanks to our hardworking cable bureau. All right.
So I was curious, just sort of in general, in terms of Pittsburgh Public Schools, and of course, there's the kind of tentative school closure plan, and lots of talk about budget and consolidating and whatnot, and what role your office could play going, because I know there's lots of angst around this.
So our role, the Pittsburgh Public Schools report we did focused not exclusively, but primarily on the relationship that the city has with the school district. And that's what our office produced that in the scope of our city controller role. Our school controller responsibilities, we are much more limited in scope. I will tell you that we are evaluating and looking at 2 things within that office right now as it relates to expenditures, because those are functions that do touch the school controller's office. For contrast, I think we have a total of 8 employees in the school controller's office, which includes a quarter of my salary. So we have a very contracted staff. But I am thrilled to entertain any work that you would like us to do. I will flag that it is in the charter, and we try to abide by this, that we are in every city department, whether that's a fiscal audit, a performance audit, or a special report, once every 4 years. And we have an auditing staff of about 19, including management. Yeah, fewer than 20. So we don't have a ton of staff that we can expend on that type of work, because the school controller's office is just so small, and we have the responsibilities outlined in the home rule charter. But that said, I believe that this is probably the most important conversation that is impacting both city council and the school board. On a good public school district is what we owe to, first and foremost, the children who live here and the families that the district serves. And I think making sure that we are serving city families in the best way that we can is of the utmost importance. I think that there's probably no more pressing issue that the city's facing right now than the school issues with the school district. And I welcome the opportunity to, whether it's a joint partnership or something that you all need us to look into. There are folks who are working on this from the media standpoint, but I'm thrilled to do anything that we can, because I can't, in agreement with you, this is just such a pressing issue, and I think that we need to do everything we can to retain families in the school district.
Yeah, so in that report, and we had communicated about it, there was the recommendation to sort of revitalize this city, city PPS task force or whatever. I don't remember that. Who would instigate that?
What should happen next is that the school board should vote on, because the city council in 2019, is that the correct year? 2019. It was before the pandemic. Council actually voted on it, and so the next action needs to come from the school board itself. And then what I would hope is that we would swiftly move here in the city to appoint the appropriate people to serve on that commission or task force. Actually, task force. Okay. But yeah, it's my understanding that the school board would need to act next.
Okay. My next question is and this is not specifically with regard to your office. And again, it's a pretty broad question, so I don't know, maybe it's, maybe this would be sort of an audit that you guys could do if you know, but I hear a lot just sort of in passing that people hesitate to sort of want to do business with the city, right? Like it takes too long. There's so much red tape, and I get it. And that's sort of one of the big inefficiencies of government is our need to be transparent, right? Is our need to very clearly document where every dollar is going, and because it's taxpayer money. Because if you don't do that, then you get you get corruption and graft. So, but what whether it's within the departments themselves, within the controller's office, just overall with our procurement processes, what can we do to kind of keep that transparency, but also just make it a little easier for people to do business with the city, get paid faster, that type of thing?
One thing we're trying to do is streamline processes and digitize them. So I think right now what seems to happen is once someone completes a service for the city, I'll use city cuts as the example because I know that you and I are often in communication about that, people assume that 24 hours later we're sending a check out. And I understand, particularly for small businesses, how a delay in payment is very detrimental to their ability to operate and do business with the city, right? Because they're waiting, there's a time lag that it has to go through an appropriate check and balance. But what I would say is often the answer is it's in the controller's office. And our process, unless there is an issue with an audit, almost always from the time we receive an invoice to the time a check hits the mail is 5 working days. So I'm hoping that the digitization of this process will allow vendors, project managers within the city, and then our office, because right now, if we get a call from, a vendor, and if the check hasn't come to us, we don't know where it is in the process, which is a huge issue because people don't know who to call. If you're looking for a $5,000 check from a City Cuts, it's been 3 months. Where is your check? And it's almost never with our office unless there's an issue with the invoice itself. So we're hoping that getting that online and like DocuSign, but you can see actually where it is sitting in the queue to get paid. And oftentimes, our project managers have limited resources and they're working on a ton of different projects at one point. But I'm hoping that standardizing that process and getting it online will allow clarity for the vendors themselves and also for the project managers to see what's outstanding and what's not.
Is that something that's in the works? I mean,
We're working on it with procurement, OMB, and then the various city departments, yes.
Okay, great. And then just the last question I have, again, it's like, I'm sure members can relate, when you're on council, everybody's got like some information for you. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes,
everybody's got like
I
a
do.
tip or like a whatever, and so you'll hear about like, oh, this company that's doing this and that, blah, but so I wonder just about like contract audits, like how often are you able to sort of, pick, just name and, any vendor or company contract or whatever and just be like, okay, let's look. This is someone we work with a lot. Let's look and like really see how long, let's say if it's like someone who does paving or something like that, like how long do those streets actually last? Like when are we you know what I mean? Like that type of thing. Like what is the quality of the work and that we're getting
The
for the
Garland,
price sort of comparatively?
the Garland report that we did, I think it came out over the summer, that was, to my knowledge, the first time we'd done a full comprehensive report on a particular vendor. I'm thrilled to do, because they're more narrow in scope, it's not easier, but it's because of how narrow it is, it's feasible to do those more often. If somebody has a legitimate concern, then they'd like us to look into something, we're always absolutely happy to do that, knowing that they do take time, right? Mm-hmm. I can send you payments in 15 minutes, but to really evaluate it and see if we've gone back does take some time. But I will reiterate, our inspections team, when work is completed anywhere in the city, we have a team of inspectors who go out, measure speed bumps, measure speed humps, look to make sure that, if we installed new lights at the Shenley Park ice rink, that the lights work, or the heater works, or we send inspectors out to actually look and inspect that and those invoices before they're paid. So when you hear of a delay, it's because we're sending an inspector out, and if they can't get access to the building or whatever's going on, but we have an entire staff that goes out and actually does inspect the work before it is paid. They have really cool days. And the interns that go out with them have probably the most fun in the office.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's interesting to know, and I can always let you know, But I would be curious just about sort of like long-term durability of work.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a PennDOT thing in my neighborhood, but so it doesn't relate to us. But like there was this shield put under the bridge, and in less than a year, it rusted out and started falling down. So something with whoever did that did not do what they were supposed to do, and now they are replacing the entire shield. So these things happen,
And with DOMI, we in the DOMI audit that we did, it might have come out even 2 years ago at this point, but we talked about how DOMI needs to work with their utilities when they're going to rip up our streets, because their vendors for paving are different than the city's vendors, and their expectations are different than our expectations. And that is something I think, and it's also very frustrating if you just live on a street and 3 times in a year and a half it's been torn up because of whether it's paving, or Duquesne Light or whomever. I think that is a place where we can improve just generally too, is the coordination between the city and the utilities. And I don't know if Namita, do you have anything you want to add to that? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it for me. I appreciate, I always enjoy working with you, and
likewise.
keep up the good work.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Kell-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like for you just to explain, first of all, I think you're doing all an amazing job. I think there's a lot right now going on, and it's really challenging on your department. and as well as, the entire city. But I think that a lot of it's falling to you for like some answers and wanting to know some stuff, which I have to know. I want to know today myself as well. But when you talked about PPS, the last time they were audited that I recall was when I asked Controller Lamb at the time to audit them, and the scope of work was limited. And you mentioned that again today.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a list of what you can audit?
So I generally look at anything that touches our office. The school controller's office is something we can audit. Just for historical context, 3 times from 2010 to 2019, the Auditor General has done a school
Right.
performance audit of Pittsburgh Public Schools. The new Auditor General closed the School Audit Bureau, and the audit that you're referring was in 2020. Controller Lamb did an audit of device, I think, distribution technology audit for Pittsburgh Public Schools. So if there is a specific concern and we have cooperation from the school board as well, we can do a more extensive audit. But the work that we're limited in what we can do in the auspices of the school controller's office are things that touch our office. So accounts payable, for example, is not a responsibility in the school controller's office. The checks come out of the school finance
So
office.
one of the things I'm concerned with is the foundation funding, and back when I worked for the district, people used to say that they'd have to have a certain program in place because the foundation that was funding something wanted this program in place or whatever. I'm curious what their funding looks like on the school district level, and to what degree they have, a say in what's happening in our schools, and also here in the city of Pittsburgh, because there's a lot of private dollars and coming into very public services. So I'm curious about that.
Money in is generally received by the treasurer, so all money out is what comes through both the city controller and the school controller's office. We obviously have access to the records, but the money in is just because of those intentionally segregated duties. Money in is the school treasurer, and the school treasurer serves as the city treasurer, so it's Treasurer Gula. So if we're happy to get you a list of foundation dollars, that to the extent that we have access to that information, it's publicly available. But the money in that's how I describe it to folks. Money in is the treasurer, money out is the controller.
And the other thing that I have a lot of concern with, and we had a team together looking through the trust funds
Yes.
for the city of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And we closed a few, but hardly any at all, to be honest with you. And I'm just wondering, with the auditing of those trust funds, have you found anything concerning? Have you done them recently?
It's our belief, and
remember.
it has been Controller Lamb's belief, as you know, that we have too many trust funds and that money sits in these accounts and is just untouched year over year. I believe Jamie Zala, who's our new chief accounting officer, is working with Patrick Cornell, thank you, to evaluate trust funds and figure out which ones we can recommend be dissolved.
Is there someone from city council on that, meeting with them?
I'm not sure who's involved. Are you involved with that? No.
I would
Okay.
love for
Sure.
someone from
Yeah.
city council to be involved in that
Absolutely,
too. Because
yeah.
it shouldn't just be one-sided, that we should be hearing,
Yeah.
we should have somebody who's going to speak for council as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I don't know that anybody on council speaks for all of council, but it'd be nice to have somebody who can, advocate for some of the things we have concerns with. Maybe our budget director, who works
Absolutely.
for all of us. And then I want to talk to you about the food justice funds, the Stop the Violence grants, and just other grant money that goes out. You see a lot of good things happening with some of the dollars, but there's also a lot of concern, because when I hear concerns and I bring them to the table, it's because I heard it from the community, not because Teresa Kell-Smith, knows that there's some issue. It's because somebody has, raised some levels of concern. I just heard recently with the Food Justice Fund, I actually asked Director Vargas to look into it, that there's somebody who's somehow going to benefit from this, this funding, who works for the city. And I don't know how to even track that. You know what I mean? I don't know how to find out, because it was something with a, what are those those fund pages? I can't think what they're called.
GoFundMe.
Is
GoFundMe.
It may be some page like that, but it's it may be crowdsourcing or something like that. Is there something like that? I can't remember what she told me. I have it written down though. But she did say, but she's told me she'll send me all kinds of information. But I just don't know how you keep track of that, and is that something that you look in to make sure that there's no conflict of interest with city employees?
So it's my understanding that the Food Justice Fund is going to be administered the same way the Stop the Violence Fund had been with the Poise Foundation. And I think that there's a post agenda scheduled for,
With the Poise Foundation?
I'm sorry.
The Poise Foundation will do this?
That's
fund as well?
was my understanding, that they were going to operate in a similar vein, that there would, like, the money would go to a nonprofit to distribute.
Yeah, I think it's different. I think
okay.
it's,
It's not going to the Poise Foundation.
No,
It's
no,
going
no.
to someone else, but it will
a
work
different
in the same
foundation.
fashion.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was also concern about that organization, where they came from nowhere and all of a sudden they got this contract to manage this fund. And I really don't know a lot about
We
either of
have
them, to be honest with
continued to ask, so audits evaluate spending after the money is spent.
you. Yeah, New
so-
Sun Rising is the group.
You know, when we've become aware of a concern as it's actively happening, we'll do what we can and alert city council and the administration. But an audit evaluates spending after the money has been spent. Our office has voiced our concerns about the arrangement with the Poise Foundation since its inception, since the relationship's inception. We have continued to seek
Who did you share that with?
Controller Lamb. I think we sent letters to who would have been council president then?
It would have been me probably.
But yeah,
4 years.
probably. Yeah, and I have a
I'm-
copy. I'm happy to resend
Yeah,
a
please
copy.
resend
Sure.
that because I didn't see that.
And I know we communicated
And if-
directly with the
let me
administration.
just say this, and if I did see it, it's why one of the reasons I asked questions.
That's
So-
okay.
So I'll just be
No,
honest.
it's but not that the money wouldn't be used for violence prevention, but there was just a concern generally with, for example, and I'm full disclosure, I'm on the board of the YMCA, but the YMCA has a relationship with Poise to receive city funding, but at the same time, the city has a relationship with the YMCA independently. So why are we using the Poise Foundation to distribute money for some, you know what I mean? Like it just, and the concept as I was told, was that the smaller community organizations that maybe don't have EINs would be using the Poise Foundation as their fiscal sponsor.
So we also were told that we don't use fiscal sponsors anymore in the city for various dollars. At least I was told,
support
but then I
that.
noticed that they did do it after with other people. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I follow one set of rules and others.
Well, if you're going to use this fiscal sponsor, you should there
what is
should be
it?
an MOU. There should be things that outline the relationship between the
Okay,
entity
I
and the
apologize. I
fiscal
want to make sure I
sponsor.
clarify this real
Sure.
quick. It was
Rising tides.
Rising Tides, not New Sun Rising. So I
Oh,
want to
for
make sure
the,
that, yeah, I don't want to represent somebody's work.
See how I can confuse those two names.
But can I tell you, one of the reasons I had concerns with some of the trust funds is because, as I mentioned, people raise, as Councilwoman Warwick mentioned, we get inundated with, information. And we're not detectives, we're not investigators. We're not auditors. So it makes it very challenging when you're getting information like this every single day for different things. And one of the things I looked into was, I thought I can look into what's happening in my district. So with the Stop the Violence. And I looked in last year, it was when Jay Gilmer was still here, I looked into some of the organizations in my district receiving funds. And the one person finally admitted in front of other people that he didn't have a program. And so he wasn't doing, so I went and I said he's not even running a program, but yet he received funding. And there's a whole theory about where the funding actually went. But it's concerning to me when people are desperately looking for that help and desperately needing that help, and they're not getting it because somebody's taking it and not using it for the way it was intended. And I think that's a challenge with anything, but then there's also people that are doing amazing work that could use a little bit extra help, a little bit extra funding, and they're not getting it because somebody who's not using it in the proper way is taking those extra dollars. So I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, it's actually benefiting and we're actually seeing
Absolutely.
results.
yes,
And-
I totally
and if we're
agree.
Not, I don't want to see it going out the door until we get that under. So
I believe there's a post agenda scheduled for the Stop the Violence Trust Fund.
I think there was one, right?
Or
There was
it
one.
just happened. I'm sorry.
There was one. And I want to say the REACH people, they were doing, I see them in my community, I see them doing things, so I don't want to say that they're not doing some stuff, I see them. But I think there's a lot of stuff happening in public safety, and I think people are hesitant to question anything when it's public safety because you don't want to jeopardize someone's safety, right?
Right.
But it's the same thing with the Roots program. We keep hearing that there's $10 million missing. Do you know anything about this $10 million? Or does anybody here?
I have gotten an invoice, and I think we processed the payment. It was for about $750,000 for work that was done for Roots, but it was a multi-hundred-page invoice, so it took us a few months to go through. But that, I will tell you that payment was made from our office.
The payment was made for 700, but what about the 10 million?
All right.
Does
Well,
anybody
that
know
money was transferred from American Rescue funds into the operating budget. So that was an operating budget line. I know there have been questions about how that has been separated from rolling over into general funds and the annual, I'm blanking
So
on
that money is encumbered still on the
Right.
Roots line. It is specifically designated for this work. It's a little bit odd because of how ARPA funding works, that it had to be encumbered in such an early and strange way, where it just looks like $5 million at a time got moved out once a year, right? In
22
in the annual,
and 23. There
in
were
the
two
annual ARPA reporting.
transfers that,
But you're watching that, right?
Yes.
If
And
you
do
go
you
to the
share the
contract-
concern that people are saying that there's money missing? That's all I want to know.
No, that money is in there. If you search the contract, it's
Okay.
clearly
So
encumbered
there's
in
no
our
reason.
financial systems.
So I want to make sure the public understands that, because we continue to hear that, and people are saying, was council, why are we not watching this? So that's important to know, that there is not a concern, right?
Yeah, that money is clearly tied to the contract, and we can watch it get spent for the purposes that it was designated for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you cleared that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's good for not just me, but for the public to know too. And overall, for me, I just would like to know, I think we have a lot of also foundation funding coming into the city. I'd like to know more of what we have coming in, private dollars coming in. And would that be better used for things like Stop the Violence, food, any type of grants that we're handing out? Would those private dollars be better used for those, what we can use our dollars? And I would like to maybe go over some of this with you, because I want to
Sure.
make sure that what we're doing is we're using our dollars to do the things we're supposed to be doing here, cutting weeds and debris, paving roads, keeping people safe, things that people care about, and using the dollars that are extra for things like grants and things that that are also important to the city. But somebody can also measure and make sure that they're getting some results for their dollars too.
Sure. I will say most foundation money that comes in is very, very narrowly tied to a very specific purpose. I would love to see more revenue from the voluntary payments line or pilot payments, however you want to categorize it. And that's generally, when you think of big dollars that come in from foundations, that's generally how it would be received. And that line next year and this year is, I believe, less than $500,000. So the foundation money that we do receive, and we do see some, but it's usually very, very narrowly tied to a specific
Yeah.
funding. And
I
it's
think
usually in the
sometimes it's tied specifically to political agendas and not necessarily what's best in the communities. I think they get their direction from one part of City Hall and not from everyone. I do want to thank the Hillman Foundation and the Dunlap Foundation for the work they do in our district, because some of the work wouldn't be done if it weren't for them. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of things funded in my district. I'm thinking, oh my God, if they could just put the money here, there would be a real solution there. We have Christy Porter that has 100 disabled people living in the facilities that they have, and they care for them all day long. She keeps kids in the summertime, for helping with tutor. And I would like to see some places like that, getting funding. But I don't know that I want us to get. I would be great to connect them to foundation funding. And she's good at getting foundation funding, but there's others that in my district that need a little bit of help. I would love for us to work more with those foundations and getting those dollars directed towards better projects and things in the city. But I would also like to see them funding things like Stop the Violence and food justice and things that we care about, but our tax dollars really weren't intended to cover. So that's it for me. But thank you for all the. I know this is a difficult time, and everybody's, especially election times, are coming. It's really going to be crazy. So, and they're going to be looking to the controller to see, what are you doing here? So thank you for your work, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilperson Charlin.
Thank you. And I feel like I'm going to make a joke about this for every one of these today, but I feel like the next audit you need to have is on heating in the building.
In the
Agree.
microphones.
Yeah, I was.
The bill has been paid.
But no, I kid. I want to thank you and your office, but you specifically, you've been a great resource for me. We both were sworn in, at the same time, and
That was me swearing.
but we have a great relationship in that I can call you and ask you a lot of questions where things are, and I really appreciate that, and I really value the camaraderie between my office and yours, and being able to rely on your staff on a lot of different things, has really helped me in my first year. My first two pieces of legislation were actually directives to you, so thank you for for that. It feels like we haven't acknowledged that you did certify the 5-year revenue
Yes.
this year, which was something we asked you to do at the beginning of the year, and something that I think is really important. And I kind of want to notice, but that was the result of that legislation. I want to ask, because your office, one of the kind of unspoken, we all use the term fiscal watchdog, but you really are an office that does restore faith that people's tax dollars are going where they're supposed to go. And I think for the longest time in my role, I always thought that the controller's office was like this limitless knowledge base of all these accountants running around that knew where every penny was. But you really don't have a huge team down there. It's
No.
not nearly as big as I once thought it was. So if you were to expand the controller's office, where would you like to expand? What would you like to do to help restore people's faith and where the dollars are going?
I think each section, to be honest, could use a few more bodies. I think as we move into the digitization of things, roles and responsibilities will shift. But as things are right now, I mean, our accounts payable staff needs more help, right? And there are people, when you look at the roster, there are people who can't do two functions because duties, you can't voucher and you can't print checks, right? So duties have to be intentionally segregated to avoid the opportunity for fraud or abuse. Our accounting staff is almost fully staffed. We've been unable to get to full staffing in the last 4 years. Our audit staff is remarkable. Everybody in management is new to the controller's office in the last 2 years. I'm counting Doug because he came back. But so we have new leadership that we've brought in, but with new leadership, we've lost 250 years of experience in the last since 2021. So the one thing I think that I have enjoyed, like as a resident and learning about our office, our reports, the special reports section run by Mark Batak, has been doing really interesting work that I think has really informed what council does, because they're not the full audits that are required. They're more narrow in scope. They look at a specific issue. They intend to be timely and topical. And I think that section of our office could grow in a way that would be very useful to our policymakers and our in the administration. So, I mean, I would love to see all of our sections grow, but I think in particular because of the use that I have seen from our special reports and how it has informed public debate, I think that would be a section that I would expand upon if given a magic wand and an unlimited budget.
That's helpful to know, and you're right. Your audits and your reports are very helpful for us as leaders that are in our neighborhoods and on our committees. We don't always see the ins and outs of like how a snowplow works that your auditors or your people doing the reports are able to look at and actually say like, hey, you might think that this works this way, but actually on the ground, this is what is happening here. I joke because to me, it's like, seems like a kind of a funny thing, but your crossing guards audit was incredibly enlightening to me in kind of a way of looking at how not just Pittsburgh Public functions, but how our charter and private schools function, and the resources, the publicly funded resources that are required to make these other institutions work. And while the audit was about crossing guards, it was actually like a lot of insight into private schools and charter schools in the city and what that's required there. I think all of these audits are, and I'm saying that, I'm realizing that wasn't your audit. You were the deputy controller at that point.
No,
but
it is true. The one thing I would flag about that audit is it came about because my crossing guard at the end of my street was like, no one ever does an audit on us. And I think that it's often overlooked how interactions and conversations actually inform the direction that our office takes, particularly with audits and reports. So when people say, what about X or what about Y, the result is, it's not always an audit, but that can be the result of a conversation when someone's curious about a city operation or city function.
And I think they're really helpful for us as, you know, I hope that none of us, and I don't think any of the members of council actually feel this way, but like the joke of us being in like an ivory tower, like, you know, you're actually on the ground understanding what is, you know, how are we paving the streets and what actually is the function that we're intending to perform there. And I cannot thank you enough for those audits. I do think that we as a body can do a better job of educating ourselves on, you know, calling a post agenda when you release an audit or a report, so that we can understand, you know, exactly what it is that you found and what findings are most concerning, and then things that we need to address or misconceptions that we might have about how programs are running now. And I think that is something that I know I said that we were going to do a good job of this year, and I think that we need to continue improving on that. So I'm going to hold myself accountable for that. One interesting point that you did bring up that I hadn't thought much about, we're talking about today, are your inspectors. Do you not inspect work that is done by a utility company? If People's Gas has to repave a street, does your office not re-inspect that?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
We're not even notified that the work is done.
Okay. But you do inspect
City paid for work.
City paving,
Yeah.
not utility restoration.
Anything that the city pays for, we have the authority to inspect. And a lot of projects happen, so it's
Sure.
a sampling. But yeah, we try to inspect every project that the city pays for.
I think that's something I would like to dig more into of who is actually inspecting utility restoration and how are we making sure that that's up to standard. I know Domi's inspecting it to a degree, but I've seen some really lousy work, specifically from utility restoration.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we need to dig into a little bit of who is actually inspecting to make sure that happened, and how are we making sure that the work is being done properly. I'm specifically thinking of street paving, but
Yeah.
I can think of some like really, really lousy utility cuts and restorations that there's parts of my neighborhoods that I feel like I'm off-roading the entire time. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just an idea, and it's been sort of, I throw around this idea, and it's interesting, the three of the newer members of council. I think that the city has many tools that sort of monitor different pieces of that overall process. The clerk's office has Legistar, and you can look at the bill number and the enactment number. We have the contracts you can view, and we also keep record of all those invoices, but there's no one connected loop that shows you have passed legislation. It has been authorized. You could easily link to the contract, and then when those bills are paid, to see which contract it hits, and to actually see the invoice breakdown for where that work actually happened. So I think, we all have access to those tools, but maybe someone who doesn't know which specific resource there is that the city has can't easily just jump in and identify where those different touch points may be, that what their question is. That, well, when they did this work in front of my house, when exactly did that happen, and when was that last done, and who did it, and all right, did they get paid?
Yeah.
So
A streamlined system like that, yeah.
Connects all of that just in case when you're asked, when either your office or a staff member or someone is asking you, when you're just out in the community, and where they could even find that information is sometimes challenging, just in case they're willing to look through the city website and trying to find those different resources.
Yeah. It sounds like something that the Myberg was supposed to, like that seems like a thing that Myberg could have done, except that Myberg did too many things and would crash my computer every time I tried to open it. So
yes, it opens at the same time.
Yeah, that is, and I think that's just something that we continually need to improve upon is working with utilities to make sure that the work is up to our inspections there. It is interesting also because your job is so, your office is so heavily involved in like the payments of the city, but we also look for you for answers about our financial health and where we are and what you think is important and concerning. And I would like to take an opportunity again to ask you how you feel about the financial state of the city and our budget.
I continue to be concerned about the city's fiscal health. We are the 5-year projection with expenditures as it relates to our fund balance. I mean, we're at 10.1 in that 5-year window and pulling extensively from the rainy day fund on an annual basis for the next 5 years. I do think revenue projections are, on the whole, accurate. I do believe that, but as was discussed several months ago, our office does not certify expenditures. We're not a budgeting entity. So I would just, as council continues to evaluate expenditure projections, particularly for the next 2 years, I just would be very mindful of where we're headed and make sure that those projections are as accurate as possible. I believe on the whole that this administration presented a budget that is clearly trying to be mindful of the fiscal challenges we're facing, but I do think that there are probably some unrealistic expectations in the expenditure lines that you all are considering, and I hope that is those are addressed.
It was very diplomatic.
Thank you.
Those are all.
But I think that we all are, as elected officials and as offices, on the same page as it relates to the immediate future of city finances. I think people have different perspectives on how to address things, but I have enjoyed, Councilperson Strasburger and I work together on the task force with our offices, and I do think that there is a recognition that we are in for, particularly in 25 and 26, 2 very, very lean years. A lot of that has to do with the bond repayments, COVID money's going away, things we all know. But I am worried about the fund balance and the reserve cash that we have been able to accumulate over the last 7 years. And I don't want to see that progress that we've made slip away because we've just declined to make hard choices instead of dealing with the situation at hand.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to Councilman Mosley.
Thanks for coming. Good to see you.
You too.
Always good to see you. Always good to see you as well. Deputy Controller Anderson. I guess just to follow up on Councilperson Charlene's line of questioning around the city's, fiscal health. You talked about, some areas, of concern. I guess we could start with areas of concern, and then you had mentioned there was some, things that you felt, were accurate as well. But if you could just elaborate a little bit, further, on some of the areas that you say that you have concerns, and then you could elaborate on some of the things that you feel are accurate and, we're more on the same page across the board.
So I think the big thing that I'm worried about is the premium pay for, particularly for law enforcement, but in our public safety apparatus, there are significant changes downward. I think that I don't have the number in front of me, but for police overtime, we'll probably hit $20 million in police overtime pay for 2024. The budget for next year is $15 million. So that's a $5 million. I mean, obviously it's a $5 million reduction. And I think medics and fire are also above where they are. The 2025 figures are far lower than I would anticipate, just knowing what I know about our public safety apparatus. So those are two things that I think are concerning. I will say I'm really pleased that the paving budget has rebounded. I'm worried that we're under, there are just general concerns about the fleet. We're not going to be able to buy a lot of vehicles in the next 3 years because of the fiscal position we're in. I think it's, again, manageable, but I just am worried about the deferred maintenance, as we think about it, is about bridges and roads, but it happens with vehicles too. And, it also happens with workforce. And particularly with police officers, we're losing retirements faster than we can replace members of our police bureau. So I just think it's important to be mindful. Again, we're not a budgeting entity, so our focus has been exclusively on revenue certification as it relates to the budget process. But generally, expenditures are where I'm worried. And I know, too, the other thing I'll flag is the salary line from 2025 to 2026 is not completely, but nearly flat. So if we know that we're not going to give our non-union employees a raise in that year, we should tell them. So I think it's important to be mindful and honest as this process unfolds. I think that most cities in the country and probably around the world, I just returned from Buenos Aires, and they're dealing with the same exact issue that we are in this post-pandemic economy. Contractions in revenue, particularly as it relates to real estate, they're happening everywhere. So I also think it's important to look at what other cities are doing and figuring out if there are ways to make up for this lost revenue, whether it's, continued conversations with our 5 nonprofit partners in the city for voluntary payments. But I will say that 50% of all city revenue comes from wage taxes and property taxes. The burden of city government and the cost of city government falls very heavily on the shoulders of the people who live here. So I think it's important that we continue to look for non-tax revenue sources moving forward, particularly as the next 2 years unfold.
Right. Thank you for that. In your experience of, not only studying what's happening here, but your counterparts, in other cities around the country, are there, cities, whether they're, voluntary payments or payment in lieu of taxes that are really leading the way and kind of providing kind of a roadmap, for other cities that face these same challenges like ours?
Boston continues to be the leader, I think, across the country in working with our nonprofits for the voluntary payments. I think part of it is just having those conversations and making sure that we're having discussions with all 5 of our nonprofit partners so that they understand, where the city's headed financially. I'll use Carnegie Mellon as an example. We had an issue, obviously, earlier this year where there was a police station that was closed overnight. Carnegie Mellon kids, if you're a high school student from Singapore, and you can go to MIT, Carnegie Mellon, or Stanford, and your mom Googles, what's going on in Pittsburgh, and there's a police station that's closed for 6 or 8 hours. That Singapore's the safest place in the world, and there's a police station that's closed in the city where your kid wants to go to school. Like, we need to do everything that we can to work together, because we do well when they do well, and they do well when we do well. So I think making sure that those conversations are at a minimum happening is probably the place where I would start. But Boston continues to be far and away, and they have an overly high reliance on eds and meds, and probably even more universities in there. Boston's smaller than Pittsburgh, but more universities, more hospitals than even the city of Pittsburgh does. So Boston continues to do that. Cleveland has been very innovative in reimagining their downtown, which ironically started before the pandemic, so they had a bit of a head start. But I think making sure that we're doing everything we can to get people into town, making sure that we're supporting, non-downtown commerce, like in Bakery Square in your district, and doing everything we can to bring jobs to the city, working with partnerships in the private sector to really, Pittsburgh is the best place. We want to bring people here. And then the last thing I'll just harp on is making sure that we're doing everything we can to keep university students in Pittsburgh. I didn't grow up in Pittsburgh. I came here for school and stayed. My colleagues, 3 of the 4 of us are not Pittsburgh natives. We moved here. And I think making sure that we're doing everything we can to retain the several 100,000 students that come here will suit us well moving forward.
Thank you for that. And just for my own curiosity, hopefully for the public's education, outside of voluntary payments and payments in lieu of taxes, are there any other examples of non-taxable revenue?
Yeah, permits and licensing, federal grants. We've written extensively. I think it was in the firefighter audit, and it was in another one, and I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. But there are, the example I'll use was with the firefighters audit. All of our fire stations ooze carbon, right? They all lack adequate bathroom and sleeping quarters for non-male firefighters. And there are federal grant opportunities, particularly in the, I think it's the IRA, is the federal investment.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Sorry. Thank you. And to modernize city buildings like that. And there's a gender equity component, there's an environmental component, and making sure that we're utilizing those federal resources to go after dollars. And, of course, those jobs, they're construction jobs too, right? And they pay good wages. So making sure that we're also going after all those federal dollars would be something I think we need to really lean into.
Thank you for that. And my last question is about an issue that has come up and also has come up on my colleagues' desk as well, around dog licenses. And I know it's not, the most critical issue, but I do have a very, for lack of, no pun intended, very doggedly determined constituent that, reminds me about the potential revenue that the city can have by modernizing our dog license process. Have you given any thought to that?
So we actually started, and haven't made progress on a report, but started the conversation around revenue fees like that. You're supposed to have a license if you have a home alarm. We've never gone after that. It's not a ton of money, but revenue associated with bus shelters and the advertising that happens at bus shelters. So there are it's not millions and millions a year, but there are tax revenue things that we're just currently not collecting, or we're not collecting them well. The idea that I've heard with the dog licenses is that we ask the county treasurer's office to collect that revenue and do some sort of cost sharing. That means we'd pay them to do it, but they actually have a pretty robust system at the county to collect those dog licenses. So if we can have them do it for the city as well, and maybe it's $1 million a year, maybe it's 500,000, I'm not sure, but I think that's a really great first step, is that now moving forward, this county treasurer is going to collect both, and we'll remit a check at the end of every year, because collecting something is better than collecting nothing.
Sure. And I'll be sure to connect with the councilwoman. We'll reach out to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And follow up on my constituents.
Dog license.
But no, thank you so much, and always good to see you. We go back probably
20 years.
Yeah, about 20 years, and as well as with Deputy Controller Anderson. So it's always good to see you.
You
and
too.
Thank you for the work you do.
Sure. Thanks, Kahari. Or Councilman Mosley.
Thank you. I'll keep my remarks and my questions brief. First, it's been great to work with you over the last almost year, and beyond that, as in your position as Deputy Controller, and with your team on the Joint Financial Task Force. Certainly been a really helpful venue and forum for sharing thoughts and ideas around our future financial outlook. I thought that one really great idea that came out of the statewide campaign for Auditor General for Pennsylvania was, and I thought of it as you said, you find good things in audits, was the sharing of the best practices, say if it was looking at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that one county is doing with the rest of the counties in Pennsylvania. If you took that down to a city level and you're finding something that is maybe a transferable benefit or bonus that one, say, department or bureau or anything that you're auditing is doing, and you think that it would have citywide benefit, is there a forum or is there some way that you could easily share that out and create some sort of a it's a co-benefit of, one, you don't have to be scared of audits. Like, we're going to find good things too, reminding people of that. And two, just helping government work better. If one department has figured out like a hack to, a life hack that others could benefit from.
I don't know that there's currently a forum. The audits themselves are usually the way that information is shared, but I do want to highlight, we did an audit, I think it was released about a year ago, of the EMS Bureau, and flagged that the two other emergency safety or first responder bureaus, fire and police, pay for the training of their new recruits, right? So you go to the police academy, you go to fire academy, and the medics don't. And so 3 months later, the administration announced the Freedom House Training Academy. And now we train medics and EMTs in-house. And so I think, to your point, that took something that we do in other departments, or in that case, sections, or bureaus within the Department of Public Safety, and replicated it. And we now have recruits who have graduated from the Freedom House EMT Academy, and they're working for the city and serving city residents who are in an emergency situation. So I don't know, and I'm open to ideas. Often government is siloed. I mean, it's just something that it just is. But how can we break down walls and make sure that we're using even past audits to inform future audits? Like, when this department does something well, can that be replicated in whatever fashion it looks like? Because it'll always look a little bit different, and IMP looks different than DOMI. But can that customer service facing component, for example, be replicated in the treasurer's office or in the Department of Finance? So I think that's a very valid point, and I think we need to get better about breaking down those silos, particularly in the public facing components, because I think one thing that I have found since I've been in this role, and I look at it as a responsibility, but you want to give people faith in government, right? And if when you can't figure out something, or when you can, and then you try to do something similar in a different department and you can't get a hold of anybody, it's very frustrating. So I think particularly as it relates to the public facing side of city government, where we can share best practices and where we can make sure that people are having the best experience that they can. I mean, coming into the city county building, or, trying to get a hold of somebody on the phone. I think that is something that needs to be kept in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all want most members of the public not to have to worry about government ever. And then when they do have that one or two touch points with government, that it's like as easy and pleasant as possible, right? That's the goal. So maybe alongside with Councilperson Charland, working with all of us to help hold more post agendas and highlighting the audits that are really ones that we should pay attention to, we can highlight some of those best practices and brainstorm some of those ways to break down silos. That's great. That's the extent of my questions. Anything further from members? Anything further from Controller Heisler or your team? Okay, thank you again for your time with us this morning. And If there are no further questions, can I have a motion to recess this meeting?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Our meeting is recessed. Thank you very much.